COVID updates. A lot of things going on in
a lot of things.
Weeks.
I have something I don't even know if you know about, too. I pulled up a local story that we might get to.
Jesus Christ.
Oh, fuck, man.
Well, let's start.
Dark.
Let's start with the obvious.
Yes.
The statewide vaccine mandates hit this week.
Yes, they did.
Washington State had our own version of statewide vaccine mandates for any state workers, teachers, healthcare workers, except for there was an odd cutout for healthcare workers that work in people's homes.
Yeah.
And
that's coming in
it's
November.
Seems to make sense, but in the article that I read, there seemed to be some question of the influence that the union of those home healthcare workers had over Jay Inslee's decision. I don't know. I have no idea.
Do you think the unions are running the political policy? Do you think?
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, but I don't know enough about that union or its influence
Too
to
many
decide.
fucking unions.
But I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. If this is not a perfect example of why our current landscape of unions is so fucking dangerous, if you think unions exist to protect workers' rights now, you're fucking wrong. And it's all over the place. So you could see it. They've been fighting for their own interests and the interests of their political, their political politicians and people that are running and stuff like that, so they get the policies they want. It's pretty blatantly obvious at this point, especially when we get into like Loudoun County stuff today.
Yeah.
100%.
So just within our own state, there was, and I think we'll talk about this after I talk about the numbers, but approximately 6% of Seattle PD that is going to be fired because of the vaccine mandates. 70 plus state patrol officers were fired, troopers, lieutenants, or sergeants and captains, one captain, I believe. And as far as Seattle police officers goes, they've lost 350 officers since Chaz Chop.
Yeah.
And so that's the 6% on top of the 300 police officers they've already lost in that time. Seattle, for those, for those who don't know, it's a fucking city. Terrible things happen there. It's a city. It's a metropolitan area. There's a lot of drugs there. There's a lot of crime. And so it's very interesting.
Especially with the epic amount of homeless people, too, that we have now. Massive camps everywhere.
The homeless issue is not as bad as it is in California, but it's terrible. It's really, really bad.
It's enough to make people that don't live here hesitant to go to Seattle.
Yeah.
Which I experienced recently, because it didn't used to be that way a couple years ago. I mean, it was always, the homeless has always been bad in Seattle. We've talked about it since we started the show.
It's a big metropolitan city. That's how it's going to be to a certain extent.
But the fact that now, my in-laws coming to town a couple weeks ago, and they are nervous about going to Seattle after dark because of how bad the homeless problem is now. And I fully understand where that's coming from. They left early when they left because they didn't want to get to Seattle in the dark. I said, that's very understandable. It definitely makes sense now.
It gets sketchy after dark.
It
Seattle
certainly does.
In many places gets, especially in the downtown where the ferries come over and things like that. Like, that's a sketchy part of Seattle. Underneath the overpasses, over on Rainier Avenue, all that shit. There's a bunch of
the
bad
overpasses
shit that
are
happens.
getting really few and far between now. There's only like a couple of them left standing, little sections that they haven't torn down yet.
Yeah.
Because of that Alaska Way Viaduct project that's been going on for, a decade now? It's been a long time.
There have been jurisdictions around the country, this is something that I wrote down, mostly cities are saying that some police calls during the time, some police calls are going to be limited, right? They're not going to be able to respond to some police calls. I know that during, like, the State Patrol, they said, like, we're pretty much not going to be able to respond to most of the of the accidents that people aren't injured at, like, we're just not going to show up anymore. Which is neither here nor there. I don't know whether or not you need a police officer. I don't know. But there
when it comes to like insurance claims and needing a police report filed, you're not gonna have a cop there to do it for you. You're gonna have to like go do that on your own. Go down to a police department or something like that, fill out the accident report, and then file it so that so the insurance companies can handle their shit.
But this is happening in a time in which many jurisdictions, cities largely, are seeing an immense uptick in crime.
Yeah.
Especially theft, right? We've seen a lot of cities, jurisdictions around the country that are putting out kind of new regulations around theft that we're not going to prosecute if it's under $1,000, under $900. And so you've seen whether or not the two things are correlated or not. There are more videos being circulated lately, whether or not they're coming out lately, of just huge, not rings of theft, but big groups of people going into stores and stealing a whole bunch of shit and then leaving.
Yeah.
And no one doing anything.
Keep it under $900 a piece.
So neither here nor there whether or not I think that you should intervene in that for $15 an hour if you're a security guard. It doesn't matter, right? We definitely shouldn't be incentivizing theft of under $1,000. Maybe not incentivizing because we're not incentivizing it, but we should not be.
If you remove a deterrent, you're incentivizing.
So
to some degree, I guess.
In an attempt to be as objective as possible. I don't want to use the term incentivize because they aren't actively incentivizing, but I agree with you. To remove the deterrent does...
It's an anti-deterrent.
Yes, it's an anti-deterrent. Thank you. That's probably the most objective way to put it.
There you go.
It's an anti-deterrent, right? When you have... I think one of the most famous videos is of a security guard standing in a Walgreens watching somebody stuff shit into a black trash bag, and as they ride out on the bicycle, they slap the bag, and that's about it, right? Again, I don't know what you're supposed to do about that. I'm not saying fucking shoot the guy to get the shit, but I don't think just letting people steal $1,000 worth of stuff that they can go and sell on the streets is the right way to be handling crime. I don't think that's the right way to be going about it. Maybe, I don't know, there's a whole discussion there to be had whether or not it's up to the Walgreens to hire more security, or it's up to the police or the city to be hiring more police officers. I don't know. That's a policy, and it's a policy discussion to be had between politicians and people who live in that area, what you think is the right thing to be doing. If you don't think a police presence is right, then Walgreens is going to have to take it upon themselves to hire more private security.
Or close their stores.
Which
is unfortunate because, the pharmacy, the corner pharmacy is such a... Especially when you live in a city, it's a very convenience-oriented place. It's where you go get your first aid type of deals. It's where you go fill your prescriptions.
Right.
You run in there when you need a gallon of milk in the middle of the night. It's like they're very, very convenient to have, and you start pulling those things.
The same way it was a policy decision to influence the city councils in many left-leaning cities and states to pull funding from their police departments, it is now a policy decision for you as a community, to rally your city councils to either decide an ongoing policy about this or to increase the police budget again so they can bring more police officers back. Something has got to be done. But just like it was a policy decision then, it's a policy decision now. And that's really my point, is that it's up to you as a community to be active about this if this is the problem that you're seeing and if you don't want to see it. The same way you had mobs of activists come into cities and demand that police budgets be racked down. In Seattle, we saw it immediately inadvertently affect the minority population because they just hired a whole shitload of minorities into the police department. But because the way their collective bargaining agreement was constructed, they had to fire the first in. The most recent people that were hired, which were largely minorities. So they removed a huge amount of diversity from the Seattle Police Department right before a bunch of them walked off the job.
That is such a Seattle thing to do, dude.
Yes.
God, I love
Carmen
it.
Best was like, I'm fucking out of here. Carmen Best said, I'm not going to do this because this is ridiculous. You're asking me to fire minorities for racism.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? to try and better racism, to try and fight racism, you want me to fire minority police officers. What the fuck are you talking about? In a time where crime is going up, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. And it's not like Carmen Best with this bastion of freedom or, anything like that. But, she was, for all intents and purposes, one of, like, the establishment Seattle individuals, that runs the city in a manner.
She was the first black female to be the chief of police in Seattle.
And
she quit.
Gone.
She fucking quit. Not because people were discriminatory against her, not because people were terrible to her, but because the state handcuffed her and wouldn't allow her to do her job and then demanded that she fire minorities to fight racism.
You can't make this shit up.
Welcome to the salt of the streets, coming at you every week with this food for thought. Hope you ready